how far back can you trace your family?
Well, interestingly enough, on my mother's side, I can trace as far back as her father. In fact, I was just telling your associate, I have a copy of his discharge from the Union Army in 1865. On my father's side, he is from St. Croix, and that's where the name Petersen, S-E-N, came from. It's a Danish spelling. He grew up there. I can't trace too far back on his side. I have been to St. Croix. I've seen the old plantations and the history that goes with them. But I think it's on my mother's side that I go back the furthest, and that's about it, about 150 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And so your father, tell me how your father come to the United States.
My father was a native of St. Croix, Crucian. During the 1920s, one of the mainland visitors, who happened to be the owner of the Topeka Daily Capital newspaper, was visiting the island. On a tour of the island, they were driving, my dad was a chauffeur then, driving an old Model A Ford, and they wanted to get to the top of a hill to take pictures, whatever. And, of course, in those days, there was no fuel pump in the automobile. So what Dad did, which impressed the visitor, was to turn the car around, back it up the hill, because gravity flow would then allow the gas to go to the engine. And that impressed the visitor, so he invited Dad to the United States, to Topeka, as an apprentice in the newspaper business. So Dad accepted. He started, soon only to discover that after a certain level, he had reached his ceiling. So he was very disappointed. He was not used to segregation and discrimination. So he quit that and then went into other lines of endeavor, eventually winding up as self-employed with radio, TV kinds of enterprises.
He had, as I understand it, his own electronics repair business, right?
That is correct. He taught myself and the rest of the boys the business. I knew more about electronics than anything else as a kid growing up. Radios were no mystery to me. Mom, of course, was college educated, and she was sort of the quiet force in the family. Dad, of course, with his Crucian personality, was a power in terms of punishment, etc. But good family, good strong family, and
I understand that he was very dapper.
Yeah, there is no question.
Quite a dresser and quite a very charming.
Yeah, he was. He had that Crucian charm about him, and I think it came out in me in some ways because I'm almost a spitting image of Dad. But it was a good, close-knit family, even in the 1920s and the 30s when I was born, 1932. But it was a weird coming together. In fact, when Dad arrived in the States, one of his good friends used to recall that he moved into a boarding house, and just sort of off the record, they used to say, "We got a new kind of nigga in here." Very thick dialect. He could speak about 7 different languages. And because, St. Croix is a mix of Danish, English, German, you name it, and they've got a little bit of it.
And so he had learned all of these different languages self-taught, basically.
Absolutely, because it's common in the islands, not just St. Croix, but to have the basic European elements in terms of language, then their own patois that they've developed. And it's not uncommon at all to speak 4 or 5 different languages. In fact, I just returned from Aruba and hired a guy to take me around, and he could speak about 5 different languages: Dutch, German, French, you name it. He could spit it out.
And there were 4 or 5 siblings there.
4.
4. And your sister was older?
Yeah, Ann was the oldest, then I came, and then 2 brothers beneath me.
And so did you have any of the middle child kind of syndrome?
Oh, I made out pretty well. Ann, of course, was the oldest. She was that's Daddy's favorite. I was the oldest boy, and I think the brother behind me, and then he had some sibling problems, and then the youngest, of course, was Mama's baby. So I wound up pretty much unscathed. My biggest problem was trying to stay ahead of the restrictions that were being placed on me by the family, the right things to do, because my curiosity would lead me to wherever I felt that it wanted to go. And I always sort of developed a philosophy that not just family, but someone told me there are things you shouldn't do. I had to find out why. I had to go stick my fingers in the pie and discover just why one shouldn't do these things. And it got me in some trouble on occasion, but I'll never forget that I grew older. Oh, I guess about the age of 16 or 17. I began to develop in size and stature, and I was just about the same size as my dad. And the whippings had stopped. I mean, folks now, you can't whip a child. Tell me about it. Oh, you can whip a child.
Was it one of those things where you had to go out and find the switch yourself?
Cut it yourself, and make sure it's not going to break. And I could remember my last spanking, and then I remember I was working construction and starting to develop muscle. And my dad looked at me one day and he said, "Boy, you know, the house is getting small." I said, "What the hell is Daddy talking about? It's the same size house." Well, he was saying it's time for me to get out of the nest. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful that he could recognize that and accept it. How did you meet?
Grew up together in Topeka, Kansas.
Really?
Grew up together in Topeka, Kansas. And I was about 2 or 3 years ahead of her. We're divorced now, of course. But came from the very same background. She understood a lot of the things that I understood, and it was.
Did she understand what being a military wife was going to be?
No, you can't really prepare for that, especially under our circumstances. But she loved it. She loved it. It's a very exciting, adventurous world if you're of the right mindset. You can always count on moving. At least once every 2 or 3 years, you're going to move. And you're going to move to a new place, from California to Hawaii, Okinawa, Japan, all of these things. So it's an adventure. But if you're not the adventuresome type, stay away from the military. Stay away.
And I would think also your perspective would change when you started to have children, because those kinds of changes, frequent changes, become more difficult in a way.
And it's interesting, within the circuit, you know, the kids were never without friends, because the closed circuit, they always met kids that they had known from somewhere before, and they just continually cycled through that school system, and they were never without friends. Never.
But they were also, as you said, never without problem areas in
True.
terms of those who resented the idea of them as blacks and children of a black officer.
That's true. As the years went by, of course, all of those things began to change. In fact, I recently was on a military base, just to give an example of how they have changed, and there were several, most of the couples were mixed. And I'm not speaking black and white, I'm speaking red, green, yellow, you know, the whole 9 yards. And I knew that I was out of it because I was the only one staring. Couldn't believe it.